This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
The NDP caucus comes back to Ottawa with a renewed sense of urgency after meeting with constituents from coast to coast to coast. We're more aware than ever of the situation of Canadian families who are fighting every day to make ends meet. Conservatives are also asking Canadians to give up essential public services. More than 60,000 jobs, according to some estimates, could be put on the chopping block. We will strongly condemn these cutbacks, which are harmful to Canadians' quality of life, and we will also inform Canadians of the serious consequences these cutbacks will have. Conservatives are also abandoning the federal government's central role in the provision of health care to Canadians. We saw that last month in Victoria. They are going to cut transfer payments to the provinces and are refusing to discuss this fundamental issue with the provinces. We will push for a greater number of doctors and nurses to be made available to citizens, many of whom are sick, elderly, or disabled, and unable to receive the care to which they are entitled. Poverty among Aboriginal Canadians is another source of concern. After 6 years in power, Stephen Harper is meeting with First Nations leaders for the first time tomorrow. And I must say, it took the NDP sounding the alarm for the Conservatives to pay attention to their situation. The NDP will continue to pressure the government to establish a real dialogue with Aboriginal Canadians and take effective measures to help them out of the extreme poverty and despair that is found in many Aboriginal communities across the country. We come back from these 5 weeks in our ridings full of energy, united, and ready to continue the fight to prevent Stephen Harper from ruining the society that Canadians have put so much effort into building.
Balance, sort of, keeping one eye on the budget, particularly when the budget is going to be tabled, we expect in early March, and that's at the same time that the caucus is going to be looking forward to that convention coming up just a few weeks later. How do you plan to sort of keep people's focus in Parliament on the one hand when they're going to be caught up in the leadership race at the same time?
Well, I think because we've heard back from our constituents in the ridings as we've gone over the last 5 weeks throughout our ridings of the constituency break, and what we've been hearing is concern about the loss of jobs that we've seen over the last few months. We've been hearing concerns, growing concerns about the Harper cuts that are supposed to be brought forward in this budget, cuts in services to middle-class and poor Canadian families that Canadians are increasingly concerned about because that lowers their quality of life. We've certainly heard from Canadians from coast to coast the concerns about the crisis in Aboriginal communities, triggered by Attawapiskat, but not limited to that community at all, the crisis in poverty and lack of housing. And now we have this additional issue that just before Christmas, the healthcare bomb that was thrown onto the table at the meeting of the healthcare ministers in Victoria, basically blowing up our healthcare system within a few years' time, unless those cuts are reined back and we have in place a sustainable healthcare plan. So when we look at all of those issues, we're going to be very focused in the budget, in the preparations for the budget, and in making sure we're getting across to Canadians our concerns about the direction that Mr. Harper is bringing this country.
Can I ask you about the First Nations gathering tomorrow? The Prime Minister's only plans on attending the morning part of the session, the opening ceremonies. A lot of chiefs feel are being snubbed. Do you think he should spend the whole day there?
I think to have the Prime Minister spend one day on Aboriginal issues, given the crisis that so many communities across this country are experiencing, that's the least that he could do, that he has an important obligation to be there. This is a government that has neglected Aboriginal communities, has neglected the growing housing crisis, has neglected the chronic poverty that we're seeing. He has a responsibility to be there. And the reality is this summit would not have been held if it wasn't for the pressure that the NDP brought this fall. Nicole Turmel going up to Attawapiskat, Charlie Angus and Linda Duncan, our Aboriginal Affairs critic, Jonathan Genet-Jourdain, the deputy critic, all of them working together to make sure that Canadians were aware everywhere in the country about the magnitude of the crisis that so many Aboriginal communities are experiencing. And so we're happy that the Prime Minister decided to move forward with the meeting. But now for him to say he's only going to stay for a photo op, it's simply unacceptable. That's paying lip service to what is a fundamental crisis, and his government has to take responsibility, has to move forward with an action plan. Can't do that if he just stays for a photo op and then takes off.